Quite some time ago, I started working on a new game called Truck Game. It isn't completely finished yet, but because my last video was over 40 days ago, I decided to give you a look at this new game I'm working on. In this game, you have three road lines and have to control trucks between them without colliding or bringing them to the wrong direction. At first, I began to implement some basic movement for the trucks. You can control them by selecting a road and then clicking on a vehicle you want to move there. The movement was okay, but I replaced it with something completely different later. To indicate to the player which road is selected, I made a simple shader with the shader graph. Mainly I wanted to try the shader graph, but I was quite happy with the result. Until then, there was no collision, but the player should have to avoid truck collision. So I used an explosion particle effect I made earlier for another game. Now the game is completely realistic. Yay. The last mechanic for the game to be playable was a score system. Navigating trucks to the right road increases your score, and leaving them on a wrong road decreases your score. I wasn't happy with that because I didn't want the score to be lower at some point than the highest score per round. With the basic mechanics done, it was time to work on the visuals of the game. I decided to go for a low poly look because that allows to make it look nice with little time and experience. I drew a simple texture for the grass. I modeled some mountains with a tunnel, which means I stacked different sized cubes on one and another and carved a low resolution hole in them. I created the texture for the skybox and made some trees for the background, which also was very difficult. You just stack three low resolution cones on top and you have it. With that, the first improved visuals were ready. I further improved the visuals by adding particles to represent fireflies and headlights to the trucks. I finished it off with adding additional post-processing effects. I reworked the movements so that you control each truck with left and right click to switch road and stop it with middle click. To indicate these controls, I added a custom cursor which shows the possible options for each truck if you hover over it. To give the game a bit of variety, I added two new vehicle variants. One is an emergency vehicle and one is a heavy vehicle, how I call it. The emergency vehicle can't be stopped, which also gets displayed with the cursor and is a lot faster. Because of its speed, it was nearly impossible to avoid a collision, so I made a warning sign in Blender to show when an emergency vehicle is about to arrive. With that done, I started working on the heavy vehicle variant. Unlike the emergency vehicle, it can be stopped, but is unable to change lines and a lot slower. With the vehicles done, it was time for some obstacles on the road. I added a fence and some special roads. The fence is a simple obstacle you can't collide with. It can be used to make switching between lines impossible at some parts, or to block the way before roads with holes or water. For a game to be playable, some instructions are necessary, so I built a simple tutorial. It explains the movement, switching and braking, the different vehicles, and also which road parts can be crossed and how the score works. The game was playable and had enough interesting mechanics, so I moved on to the menu. I laid out the buttons how I wanted them to be, searched an interesting font, I'm using the Costa Rica font, and started making the textures for the buttons in Paint.net. For the textures, I wrote what the button does and added some symbols representing that. In the background, I put a screenshot for the game, and I made the real game a bit darker in the background. I think they might look a bit too complicated and confusing, but let me know in the comments what you think about them or what you would change. The trucks still look pretty bad, and they should be able to display custom textures on the side of them. In the menu, I added a text field where you can paste a directory path, and it uses random images from the folder. I still had one mechanic I wanted to implement: humans. I started by making a human low-poly 3D model in Blender by following someone's tutorial. I added bones and made a walk and eye animation in Blender. The last thing missing was the textures, which wasn't that difficult. I still managed to do something wrong since it didn't completely work in Unity. It took an eternity to get the humans working in Unity, but when I got there, there was only one thing missing: blood, for when the humans get hit. Now the humans are ready to conquer the world and destroy the trucks to stop climate change or something. Or they cross the road alone and you have to avoid them if you don't want the game over. One more thing I wanted to do: improve the visuals. That was rain. I made a new shader in Shader Graph and wrote a script to change the shader when it rains. In addition, with a particle system, that was perfect rain. The last thing the game needs is sound and levels. I wrote a list in Trello for the levels I want to make, but that is something for another devlog. More important were the sounds, which I mainly got from freesound.org and edited in Audacity. With that, everything was done for this devlog. I hope you like this game for now. As always, let me know in the comments what I could improve, what you like about the game, or whatever's on your mind. By the way, this isn't the game I told you last devlog I wanted to make. That game needs a lot of planning since I don't want it to be like the firefight training game. Anyways, see you in the next devlog. Goodbye!